Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is transformational ecology. I coined that term myself. So what we're talking about is the ecology of change for ourselves, and that sometimes, well, all the time, change is disruptive by its very definition. And we get to look at creating change in a way that it is ecological. In other words, that we can weather that change in a positive way and be able to benefit from it in the deepest sense. So I think it'll be an interesting conversation, but before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any negativity, stress, tension, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, all your electrons, all your molecules, and lighting you up from the inside out. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's just gently press our palms together and very, very softly rub your fingers against your palms. Feel the deliciousness of that sensation and allow yourselves to become present right here, right now, in these remarkable bodies that allow us to experience the magnificence of life. So welcome, welcome, welcome. It's Friday. Again, it just keeps happening, right? I guess we should be grateful for that. Anyway, it's wonderful to be here with you. I'm so grateful to have you join us for these conversations. And today we're talking about transformational ecology. And I know that we often are desirous of change to happen yesterday, right? Like we want more change faster, and we just want to be on the other side of whatever the transformation is so often. And the thing is that when all change by definition is disruptive, right? Because it's disrupting the status quo. And the degree to which we experience this change, the extremity of it is something that can be so disruptive that it actually puts us back or throws us backward or into some kind of crisis of identity or of meaning. It's very common that that kind of dynamic can happen. I remember years ago when I was taking training in neurolinguistic programming, there was some radical change that I went through. It was all about redefining beliefs and identities and whatever. The thing is that the shift was so radical that my experience of it was that I had no place to put my feet. I became unmoored and really, really kind of spinning in space without having an anchor or, a way to root myself. And it took a long time to recover from that. It was deeply traumatic. And I think that this is not uncommon. When we look for change, we don't necessarily calibrate to the consequences and the repercussions. Good morning, Rosalind. So good to have you here with us. Thank you for chiming in. I really appreciate that. So today we're talking about the ecology of transformation. And so this came up for me a couple days ago with a client where this person had found themselves to be emotionally flat for years, for a really, really long time in life. And we were talking about, well, what would a result be? And the idea was that the result would be being able to feel all these feelings. And the thing is that before the shutdown, the feelings were so intense that they were overwhelming, and that's what led to the shutdown. So you can imagine how overwhelming it would be after years of being shut down to have a flood of emotions. It could be just paralyzing, right? It could be devastating to have all those emotions flood in. So all at once, after having years of kind of no affect. Good morning, Robin. Welcome. So good to have you here with us. So what we had a conversation about was the ecology of it. Good morning, Bernadette. So good to have you here with us. And Robin, Maggie says good morning to you as well. So we're talking about transformational ecology, that there is a degree of change that stretches us without breaking us. And then there's a degree of change that stretches us beyond the breaking point. And of course, that's a whole spectrum, but what we want to be allowing for is a degree of change that allows us to stretch and grow without going to that breaking point. And for in this example with this person who really did not have much connection to emotion, the whole reason for that was because it was originally so overwhelming. Do we want to be creating this flood of emotion? No, right? Because that it was a flood of emotion that created the initial flat line, so to speak. So what we want to be able to do is to open a channel for that emotion to flow through more gently, to maybe start out as a trickle, or, just to be able to move easily into that. You're not going to go from 0 to 190 all in 3 seconds. You don't want to do that, because all of a sudden you're in a static place, and then all of a sudden the world is whipping by at a speed that you can't calibrate to, right? So I'm wondering if you've experienced those kinds of changes in your life, transformational changes that ended up being really disruptive. It's interesting because I always used to be, well, I'm cautious whenever I use that word always, but I tended to be the person that would, I want the extreme, I want to just knock it all down and emerge from the rubble. The problem was that I was in the rubble, that it was not a controlled, I forget what it's called, but a controlled takedown. It was just like, poof, clear the plate, and now what? And with that clear plate, I hadn't necessarily put things in place to support me in that change. It's just like, okay, now you knock down everything around you. Now you get to rebuild, but there was like no place to start rebuilding from. And so as an example, for instance, let's say someone is in uh, uh, an abusive relationship. Well, on the surface, we would say, okay, this person's in an abusive relationship. Bernadette says you allowed it to collapse on you. Now, I actually blew it up and it collapsed on me for sure at the time, Bernadette, for sure. It was willful. I blew it up. I'll take ownership of that. I blew it up and got buried under the debris, I think, what happened. Anyway, for instance, in an abusive relationship, let's say someone's in an abusive relationship and the abuser is also the person who is responsible for financial support, right? And if there aren't resources, if there's not a strategy or a plan to just blow that up, could really end up being horribly, horribly devastating. So to be instead looking at a strategic exit and setting up support systems for an exit, that makes a whole lot more sense. Now, people don't always have that option, for sure, but making preparations, so that transition can be more ecological is a really powerful and important thing. And so, even in looking at changes of life, to be saying, I want that now. If we look at whatever it is that we're desiring now, I think it's really important to look at, well, what would the fallout be? And not to avoid the desired outcome because of the fallout, but to be able to potentially manage the fallout. So just a real simple circumstance for me as an example, I would like to be able to, my intention is to have an RV and do RV life for a while. And the apartment that I have is filled with all kinds of stuff. And so if I'm intending to set myself up well for the RV life, what I get to do is to get my house in order and pare down my belongings and make some choices now so that when I have the opportunity, I don't need to be hurried and then make decisions that wouldn't best serve me, right? And so there's change on all kinds of levels that we get to prepare for. And the idea is to be respectful and gentle to ourselves in this process of change. Now, change, as I said, is by its nature disruptive, but we can make it so that we're not buried by the debris of the disruption that we've created. It's kind of like going to the gym, right? You go to the gym and you work out enough so that maybe you're a little sore, but you don't work out so much that you're crippled, right? Because then it can take more time to recover from the injury than the benefit that you created by working out, right? There's a balance. There's always a balance. And yes, we want to kind of push it to an edge, but we don't want to go over that edge to the point where what we were intending to be constructive becomes destructive. So Bernadette says, that's why I think instrumental for abused people to break the cycle and speak. Resources are out there, and not knowing where to seek the information can keep one in fear. Absolutely. So particularly in this situation with abusive relationships, there are thankfully so many resources. It does take research, but there's a network of people that are positioned to be able to assist in that transformation. And Rosalind says the ecology of transformation. So change versus transition. We are talking about how well we handle change, question mark. Yeah, and degrees of change. So if you've probably heard the story about the frog in boiling water. If the water is getting gradually hotter and hotter and hotter, theoretically, the frog doesn't know that it's getting to a boiling point because it's happening gradually. That's probably not the greatest example because we don't want to be the frog in the boiling water. But when there's a degree of change and transition, like I think that they're the same thing, change and transition, but we can have a change that's so radical that it's horribly, horribly disruptive and devastating. So an example of that kind of change is often the death of a loved one, which typically happens suddenly, but even when it happens as a result of prolonged illness, we have ways that we can, if it's a change that happens in the context of prolonged illness, there are ways that we can maybe make some preparations, that we can have completions, that we can resolve old grievances, and that can help. And still that transformation or that transition can be profoundly devastating and disruptive. Robin says the internet has made the choice to interrupt. Is this capable of a replay? Yes. Yes, Robin, you should be able to go and find this anywhere on Enlightened World Network's Facebook page. I have a YouTube channel that has all these things eventually posted, and so does Enlightened World Network have a YouTube channel. So you should be able to see this later. So I'm glad you had the opportunity to join us. So change and transformation. We know that we often grow through crisis, and that those crises can be a profound life turning point. And there's tremendous value in that. And in the process of going through those radical transformations, we often really fall apart, right? And in order to be building ourselves back anew, falling apart is part of it, right? But the work that I do with people, the core connection work, because it's guided by the person's inner intelligence, I believe is typically more ecological because it's driven by their own knowing. So their awareness, whether conscious or otherwise, of what their tolerances are. We want to bend to the point where we're stretched, and when we come back from that stretch, we're somebody new, but we don't necessarily want to bring on the breaking. And life brings that on anyway sometimes, right? Good morning, Lisa. Welcome. It's so good to have you here with us. So we're talking about transformational ecology. And part of this is allowing for gradual change. And even in gradual change, it can be pretty radical, it can be pretty dramatic. But if we take someone who has been depressed their whole life and then all of a sudden throw them into an experience of being joyful, what I've seen is that it's joy is like a muscle too. And these practiced behaviors and emotions of depression, if well, there's a lot attendant to it, a lot of thinking patterns that are attendant to it, and relating to life. And what can happen for people is that they feel like all of a sudden they're a stranger in their own lives. And that's kind of a wild thing for people to experience. You know, it's like tremendously disorienting, even with positive change. You know, we see that, for instance, with people who win the lottery a lot of times. You know, it's like, here's this radical change. I've gone from scraping pennies together to having millions of dollars. And all of a sudden, you know, it can, unless you have a plan, unless you have a contingency for how to deal with that radical transformation of circumstance, it can be devastating. And we've all heard stories of people who win the lottery and end up going bankrupt, right? Because this was a radical radical extreme that they aren't prepared to navigate. So Rosalind says, intentions don't always lead to an outcome you desire. Boy, oh boy, I know that. So can you focus on one thing, find success in that, then move to the next thing? Well, I think that there's a lot of merit to putting focused attention on your intentions, you know, and your desired outcomes. I think there's a lot of value on focusing our energy. And life doesn't always permit for just the one thing at a time. I don't know about you, but I've experienced that, where, you know, there are demands that require attention in different directions sometimes. And that said, I'm one of the I don't know if I still do this, but I used to be the person who would eat one thing on the plate at a time. So if I had the protein, the vegetables, the starch, for example, I would eat one thing at a time in the past. And I find that when I am able to have focused attention, I can be more productive. And that focus happens sequentially, because there are all different things that I'm engaged in, and they all require attention. I think it is probably more productive, for me anyway, to be immersive in something, but I don't always have that luxury. So I guess it's about how much time and attention we put to something before moving to the next. Trying to juggle a whole bunch of things all in the same moment, it can be deeply counterproductive. So at least in my experience. So finding our edge, I guess that's really what this conversation is about. You know, to be allowing ourselves to expand to the edge without going over the edge. Because going over the edge, I've been there. I've been there a bunch of times. I used to pursue that, going over the edge. And I ended up pretty banged up for it, you know, emotionally, psychically. Um, what I found was it wasn't the most effective or efficient modality or process for me in terms of change, because I spent so much time recovering in the past. And so you know, it's interesting because in a way I'm talking about moderation, or I'm talking about really being circumspect, to be looking at the consequences of our desires and our intentions and our choices. Because a lot of times we think about, well, just an easy, obvious example, I want to be rich, right? And then what happens when we're rich? We think that, oh, that's going to change everything. And in fact, we're taking ourselves along with us, right? Or I want to have, you know, a body that looks like this, that, or the other. Or I want to, you know, a lot of times we set goals for ourselves without recognizing what the ramifications of those goals might be. And oftentimes when those things arise, we can be ill prepared. So for instance, I'm sure you've heard of the imposter syndrome, right? People who are working to accomplish something and they achieve some level of success, and yet their inner self isn't identified, or isn't or is identified with the lack of success, you know. And so what happens for people sometimes is that they then self-sabotage, because these new circumstances or this change challenges some things that are deeply fundamental to them, and they can't hold that expansiveness. They don't have the emotional capacity to hold the expansiveness of that change. So it's a delicate balance when we look at ecology. And I think for those of us who are healers or teachers or light workers, or what, you know, people who are initiating change in ourselves and with others, that we get to look at this issue of ecology. It's really important. We don't want to initiate a change that leaves someone incapacitated, right? And oftentimes, you know, one of the sayings is, be careful what you ask for, right? Because you may get it, and it's a wonderful thing to get what you ask for. And I think what we get to do is to be circumspect about what we ask for. In other words, to be aware of what it really is we're desiring. So Rosalind says, I took a workshop at work and there was a personal development plan schematic. The base was purpose. That's awesome. Stacked on top with values, then goals, habits, and reflection on the top of the pyramid. Wow. Well, so that sounds like an amazing thing. And I'm going to venture to say that reflection should be at every level of the pyramid. I think that's an awesome thing that they did at your job. Like, with you, Lisa. Lisa says, I wish my job did that. It's really super powerful. And I think that reflection is the foundation to be able to identify purpose. And then then we use reflection to identify our values and recognize our values. And actually, you know, I do work with my clients with purpose and values. And even before purpose, we start looking at values, because values feed into purpose in a very big way. So, and I also just, I don't do goals. I don't do goals. I do intentions. And part of it is to orient us to be moving from inspiration, to be moving from a deep connection with our soul song, you know, to be moving from deep connection with the stirrings of our souls. And so the doing becomes an outgrowth of the way that we're being. And Lisa says that's why mirroring our shadow work helps. I'm actually thinking about doing it. So with shadow work, the power of shadow work is that we come to a greater self-acceptance, you know, that we recognize that, first of all, we are all of it. We're not any one particular part of it. So whatever that darkness is within us, whatever the shame, the guilt, the anger, the vengeance, all those things that are within us, they don't define us. They are part of us. They are part of a greater expression of who we are. And when we recognize that that's not who we are, we have an ability to encompass it, to include it in our being. And that then leads us to a greater wholeness. So that's powerful, Lisa. Good for you. I mean, when we have the ability to move beyond the shame and guilt, I had such profound shame and guilt for so many years until I did shadow work. It wasn't formalized but I enabled myself to look at those things that I had so much guilt and shame about. And when I was able to look at those things without judgment, massive transformation took place. And so I think that's available to all of us. When we deny those parts of ourselves, when we ignore them, that's when the darkness deepens. So anyway, this is Friday, and I think we're gonna call it a morning. And I'm so grateful to you always for these wonderful conversations and your willingness to show up and be so vulnerable. It's super powerful. Lisa says, I've done a lot of self-work, but there's still something holding me back. My life has been tough, and there's still a piece getting me. So Lisa, be patient with yourself, because there's always a piece. There's always a piece. No matter where you are, there's always going to be something that could shift to lighten the load and grow further. There's always something. And congratulations to you for moving through all the tough stuff that you've moved through. It's super, super powerful. And as long as we're alive, we get to keep growing. When we stop growing, that's when we start dying. At least that's my perspective. And yeah, so it takes courage. And it is a hero's journey for sure. Bernadette says, have a wonderful day, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving to those who celebrated this weekend also. I didn't know that there was a Thanksgiving celebrated this weekend. Rosalind says, thank you for inspiring us to ask ourselves questions. There's so much power in questions, Rosalind, and that's because our mind wants to answer them, right? So when we ask ourselves good questions, then that can direct us into powerful growth. Lisa says, can't go over it, can't go around it, have to go through it. It's the truth. It's the truth. And on that note, I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live each weekday morning here on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page. Oh, Bernadette, okay, in Canada. Awesome. So happy Thanksgiving to the Canadians. That's beautiful. Thank you for that. And I encourage everybody to check out the other awesome programming on the Enlightened World Network Facebook pages. There's Enlightened World Living, EWN One with the Earth. And I just am so grateful to you. Be alert, ask yourself questions, ask yourself good questions that'll forward you, that will inspire you to grow. And I wish you a wonderful, wonderful weekend with so much love.